Okay, so here we are again. Today is the 1st of October, 2025. And today the sun transitions from the days of the elder tree, elderberries, to the days of pine cones. I'm going to bring a little PowerPoint up. I've only got 9 pictures to share. And today we're going to be looking at the overview of the 4th Aicme. Nearly there. Okay. So, the Ogham is divided into 4 quarters, and each quarter is called an Aicme, and it's named after the first tree of that quarter. So the first tree of this quarter, the 4th quarter, is the pine tree, and the Ogham name for the pine is Aicme. It's the letter A, the vowel A. So they call it the Aicme Aicme, or the pine tree Aicme, or the 4th Aicme. So I'll just quickly mention that I think it was 2022, I'm sure it was our first year going round the Grove. And so if you want the basic tree lore for the pine tree, you can look on YouTube for Pine Tree 2022 on the Ogham Grove. Then in 2023, we looked at herbalism. So specifically, if you want herbalism and apothecary medicine stuff on the pine tree and its symbiont fungi, you put Pine Tree Ogham Grove 2023. And last year, 2024, we looked at gods and goddesses. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit with this overview. So if you want the deities, the gods and goddesses of the Ogham and the trees they relate to, that's last year, 2024. So you can do the Pine Tree 2024. So today, we're specifically looking at the whole Aicme, which for me at the moment is hidden by our faces. But coming down the right-hand side, you have the pine tree and then Gorse. And Gorse takes us to the moment of Samhain, and then it's heather, and then it's aspen, and then it concludes with the yew tree holding the winter solstice. So don't worry if you can't see the whole 4th quarter, because we're going to look at it further on anyway. So the simple idea is that as the Ogham is a year wheel, it's also divided into 4 quarters. And each of the 4 quarters, as well as being seasonal, like the 1st quarter is the budding time, the 2nd quarter is the blossoming time, the 3rd quarter is the fruiting time, and this final quarter is the seeding time. The fruits have fallen off the trees, the seeds are inside the fruit that is decaying and rotting on the ground, but helping that seed find its way into the earth, into the soil. So every fruit is carrying the seeds for the next year's plants. You know, nature is so abundant in that way. But each quarter is also 5 trees, and each quarter has a story. So that's what we're going to look at today. So like the first Aicme has the story of the water's edge and poetic inspiration and so on. So a little head start is that I'm going to be mentioning an Irish god or culture hero called Finn McCool. The Gaelic writing looks like Fionn Mac Cumhale. That's how it looks in English, but it's pronounced in Gaelic Finn McCool, and often spelt in a more phonetic way, like Finn McCool. Some of the old pubs in England just spell cool, C-O-O-L or whatever. So this culture hero, Finn, very important to the 4th Aicme and Samhain and the Wild Hunt and the Wild Heath. But I've already done a video. This banner is the video. So on YouTube, on the Owen Grove YouTube channel, there is this video that's just specifically about Finn McCool. So if I don't talk about him in much detail today, you can go and fill your head up with Finn McCool stuff by watching this video. It's about an hour long. And there's also another video called Stag Lords, the antlered consorts of the deer goddess. And that's relevant to the fourth Aicme too. And the antlered god, the wearing the stag's horns, is the lord of the winter time, the winter hunter, which this Aicme from the pine tree all the way to the yew tree and the winter solstice is the time of the winter hunter, and Samhain being the time of the wild hunt, winter hunt, and so on. So there's those two videos. There's this one's about an hour long, and there's this one about an hour long. So if you really want to prep your brain before we get to Samhain about the wild hunt and the antlered god, there's stuff there already on our YouTube channel. So back to each Aicme or each quarter of the year having a story. We've already looked at this with the third Aicme. So I'm just, this picture here is the stars for the third Aicme. And I'm just using this to introduce us to the stars of the fourth Aicme. The third Aicme works wonderful because there's just this perfect iconography or picture in the heavens of this big long serpent, which is a constellation called Hydra, the water serpent. And the head of the serpent on the right hand side coincides with the zodiac sign of Cancer, the crab. And the tail of the serpent on the left hand side is Libra. So this great big serpent goes all the way from Cancer the crab through Leo the lion through Virgo to Libra. It spans with its long body the whole of the third Aicme. And then sitting on it are things like Crater the wine mixing cup, the big golden vessel, and Corvus the crow, Ceridwen's cauldron this is, and her son Morvran the great crow. And then on the tail of the water serpent, the owl, Noctua, the twilight animal, where the year is going twilight in between summer and winter at the autumn equinox. So this is an example of how a quarter of the year can be seen as a storyboard. And the creatures on the storyboard are this big water serpent, a magical grail, a crow, and an owl. And then those kind of things will find their way into stories and fairy tales. And if you hear about a crow trying to do something with a golden vessel, you'll instantly think, oh, well, that's the constellations of the third Aicme, you know. So there's a story of the god Apollo sends a crow off to retrieve a magical cup. You know, it relates to this time of year. So then I tried incorporating that star lore with the trees. And this is the first and only picture that I have done in that kind of logic, mainly because I was looking at the maiden mother, grandmother of the Owen. But if you look down by their feet, you can see the golden cup and the crow and the tail of the water serpent relating to their zodiac signs of Libra, Virgo, and Leo, and how they relate then to broom, blackthorn, and elder. So you can kind of see how by mirroring the trees to the constellations, you then get a story for that Aicme, a story for that quarter of the year. Now, I haven't yet done artwork for any of the other Aicmes. This was the first one I did, and it's only 3 of the trees. So I haven't included vine or ivy. I've just done broom, blackthorn, elder. So one thing I need to do in the future is eventually illustrate a god or goddess figure for each tree and how it relates to the zodiac. So today, literally, I did this very rough scribble to show you the stars of the fourth Aicme, and that will let us talk about what to expect between now and New Year's Eve, winter solstice. So I'll give you time to look at that. It is a rough scribble, but at the bottom, you've got the zodiac signs of Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricorn on the far left. So as we're traveling around, we're starting from the right-hand side, going to the left. So we're in the days of Libra now. And each of the zodiac signs at the bottom has 30 degrees. So each zodiac sign has 30 degrees. That's a thing that is just established. And 12 zodiac signs, each of 30 degrees, gives you 360 degrees, which is a complete circle. So with that circle of the year, we can then relate the trees. So whereas each zodiac sign has 30 degrees, each tree of the Ogham has 18, because if you divide a circle by 20, each one has 18 degrees. That's the equal division in that way. So it might not feel organic or natural magic to be talking about zodiac signs and specific numbers, but it's just a way of measuring where each tree is in the year of the wheel. And that allows us to see which stars correspond with that tree. So today we're at the beginning of the days of Pine, and Pine begins at the 9th degree of Libra. So that's where we are on the right-hand side. And because it's 18 degrees, add 18 to 9 takes you to 27 degrees. So Pine will take us to the 27th degree of Libra. So Pine as a tree is completely within the influence of Libra. Gorse is a little bit Libra and quite a lot of Scorpio. And then Heather is Scorpio and a little bit of Aspen. So that you can see how they kind of cross over. And that allows the maiden mother, grandmother to each have a foot on Virgo. So Virgo then became a triple goddess because they're all touching Virgo with their feet, if you like. So with the pine tree is only touching Libra, has no other influence. Whereas looking ahead, the yew tree, Aspen and Heather are all touching Sagittarius. So Sagittarius has an influence on 3 trees, but the pine is only influenced by Libra. Now that tree of balance, that the star sign of balance, the scales of balance and justice is Libra. Now, I'm still learning too. And I've got more to say with Heather and Gorse and Samhain and then further on. So the constellations that correspond with the pine tree are a constellation called Bootes and a very bright star called Arcturus. Now, hand on heart, I'm quite ignorant of Arcturus. I know it's an important star. There's some sort of lore of it relating to King Arthur and stuff, but I need to read up on it. I'm not knowledgeable about that yet. My studies with the pine tree have been more about its folklore significance and its geographical significance, which is that the pine trees are almost always on the high ground, on the ridges, on the mountaintops, between valleys. And the Celtic people, especially in Ireland and Wales and Scotland and stuff, you live in the valley because that's where the river is. And the river is your fresh water, it's your drinking water, it's your water for cooking, it's your water for industry and washing your clothes and toilet, and it's your water for your animals, you know, so all of the domestic life has to have the fresh running water. So that tends to be in the valley. And then as the hills go up, you use the lower ground for farming, and then the middle ground is for grazing, and then the very top is where the pine trees are. And the very top is where the warriors of Ireland, known as the Fianna, would camp. They would live primarily under the pine trees, along with druids and their nematon. You know, the stargazing druids are going to be on the hilltops. And that's where the pine trees are. But the Fianna were the kind of warriors that protected everybody. So you've got the families living in the valley, and then the young warriors, men and women, boys and girls, are up on the high ground, camping and training and making sure that their family land isn't invaded by other cattle rustlers and so on, you know. So and it was a thing for the teenagers, for the youths, to go up on the highlands to protect your loved ones and be very athletic warriors and stuff. So that's the origin of Finn McCool. Finn McCool is the leader, the king, if you like, or chief of the Fianna, the warriors that were under the pine trees protecting the watersheds, protecting the tribes. So with the pine tree, then you've got the highness of the hilltop directly under the stars. So if you were down in the valley looking up at the hills, you would see the pine trees at the top, and you would know that in those pine trees were the warriors and the druids, and then directly above the pine trees are the stars, you know. So the pine is the tallest tree in the Ogham, and it reaches up to the stars, and it's almost got this kind of connection with the heavens, the spirit realm, the star realm, because it's the tree that literally reaches up into the star realm. And it's interesting that the story of the fourth Aicme will take us to the center of our galaxy, to the tree of stars, Aspen, and rebirth with the winter solstice. So from a more kind of folklore kind of way, the pine tree, I consider at the moment in time, Finn McCool and the warriors of Ireland getting ready for the wild hunt. It's a time of preparation. It's a time of campfires and getting ready to go across the Wild Heath hunting in a psychopompic kind of way. I also looked ahead with the Ogham because I had it in my head that the pine tree is the tallest of trees in the Ogham. And it was interesting to find out how tall each tree grows. And it is, I was right. But going by British or Irish, British Isles, Northern Europe species of pine. So, but even with the British Isles, the native pine is what we call the Scots pine. That's the native species for these lands. And it will grow to 180 meters. It's the tallest. In second place are trees like the oak and the ash, and the yew tree can sometimes get high, but nothing gets as high as a pine tree. It is the tallest. And when you're in America, you know, you get beyond the Celtic lands, there are some species of pine that dwarf Scots pine, you know, that they double in height, the great big redwoods and things like that, you know. But just for the Celtic lands, the Scots pine is the tallest tree in the Ogham. So that symbolism of the tallest and living on the hilltops and reaching the highest towards the stars is rather special. I think. So that's where we are today, with the sun going from the elder tree autumn equinox into the days of the pine tree. So going on with the rest of the story, so I've still to learn constellation Bootes and the bright star Arcturus. I can't really yet incorporate them into my understanding of the pine tree because I haven't studied them enough, but I have looked at further on. So after preparing for the wild hunt with the days of pine, seeking high aspirations and spiritual ideals, we come to the days of gorse. And gorse and heather, the next tree or shrub, are unique in that of all the trees in the Ogham, gorse and heather only live on heathland, on the wild expanse of the wild heath. They're not forest shrubs as such, or high mountain tops like pine trees. They're the wild heath on cliffs above the sea and so on, or Dartmoor, Bodmin Moor, places like that. And of course, they're not trees either. You know, heather is very, very low. It might only get to about 2 foot high at the most, and usually less. And gorse, I've seen gorse go about 8 foot high, maybe at the very most, but it's a shrub. It's not a tree as such. So in the first Aicme, you have the older tree with a capital letter A, not elderberries, but the older tree, and the willow tree. And uniquely, alder and willow live by the riverside. So we call that the water's edge. And this is a kind of balance to that heather and gorse are uniquely the wild heath, the Wuthering Heights of Kate Bush, you know. So think then of the pine trees and the young warriors getting ready to hunt. And then they're coming down, riding their horses or running down from the hilltops down into the wild heath. And in the wild heath, there's no trees as such. It's mainly all this shrubland. And first of all, there's the gorse. And the gorse is very, very spiky. It's quite unpleasant. If you had naked legs, you wouldn't want them rubbing up against gorse. So you'd have to wear trousers or leather strappings around your legs to protect your legs from the spikiness of the gorse. But that spikiness protects lots of creatures in the autumn and the winter. So even bigger creatures like sheep will nestle down in the gorse and be protected. But lots of smaller creatures like rabbits and hares and serpents are safe in the gorse from predators. You know, they can get under the gorse and hibernate. So although the gorse is very spiky, it's a protective kind of energy. And it fits very well with its star sign zodiac, Scorpio, because Scorpio has the sting in its tail, you know. So you've got a very spiky scorpionic shrub, which is also very beautiful, as Scorpios usually are, but can be spiky as well, you know. So here's the thing then. So you can imagine the young warriors coming down from their camps on the hilltops and they're hunting across the wild heath. And that takes them to the moment of Samhain. And that gorse concludes at the moment of Samhain, which is the 15th degree of Scorpio, or the middle of Scorpio. Every zodiac sign has 30 degrees. So the 15th degree is the midway point. Beltane, the opposite time of year, is the midpoint of Taurus. So it's the 15th degree of Taurus. And Samhain here is the 15th degree of Scorpio. Now here's the best bit of star lore that I know relating then to the fourth Aicme, compensating my lack of knowledge about Bootes and Arcturus, is corresponding with the moment of Samhain, or just leading up to it with the days of Gorse. There are two constellations directly above Gorse. One of them is called the Serpent's Head. Its proper name is Serpent Caput, just means the serpent's head. And then a circle known as Corona Borealis, or which means the northern crown, like the crown a king or queen would wear. So you've got this northern crown, Corona Borealis, and the serpent's head, Serpent Caput. And they're the constellations corresponding with Gorse, taking you to the moment of Samhain. And that's really important because it's a well-known symbol here from the Gundestrup cauldron of the Cernunnos figure holding close to his face the serpent's head and the round torque. So it's a perfect artistic representation of that Samhain, or leading up to Samhain moment, of the wild hunt and the wild heath. And on the Gundestrup cauldron, the antlered, they call him Cernunnos. There's no inscription, but Cernunnos just means horned one, surrounded by the animals. And we know from other iconography of Cernunnos, in which he's depicted with a stag and a bull. So the Gundestrup cauldron here also has a stag next to him and a bull behind the stag. So it's deliberate star law of the northern crown and the serpent's head corresponding with Samhain, but also the stag and bull as times of the year, which is what we use with the Ogham. So when the sun's in Taurus, the bull time begins. The summer half of the year is the time of the bull, the domestic agricultural farming time of the year. And then as soon as you're past autumn equinox, which we are now, you're into the winter time of the year. And the animal totem or animal motif for the winter time is the stag. So the winter deities, gods and goddesses, have been depicted with antlers, and they're arguing that, it's that winter symbol, So this figure at Samhain with the circular constellation of Corona Borealis and the serpent's head is also the antlered god, because it's the winter months. So again, it fits in perfectly with this. The antlers of Cernunnos and the antlers of the stag make a deliberate W shape. And that W shape relates to the mother goddess of the Celtic people, which is a constellation in the middle of the Milky Way known as Cassiopeia. But to the Welsh, it would be Dawn, the mother goddess. To the Irish, it's Danu. But that W-shaped constellation is really important. And it's our number one most viewed video on the Ogham Grove YouTube channel. It's called The Great Mother Goddess of the Celts, and that explains this W shape here. So I would say that the male figure Cernunnos is wearing the headdress of the wintertime, the stag's antlers. But both he and the winter stag are honouring the great matriarch as well in that. And there's lots of other things on the Gundestrup cauldron acknowledging the W-shaped goddess and so on. So there is other star lore, which I'll talk about on that video, on the Gundestrup cauldron, which helps to confirm the torque and the serpent's head corresponding with Corona Borealis and Serpent Caput. So moving on then from Gorse taking us to Samhain. Once you get to Samhain, the wild heath, the wasteland, becomes softer. We go into the fields of heather. It's not so spiky anymore. And all of the lore with heather is about domestic comfort, very much in the way of domestic comfort helping you through the winter time. It literally was used for kindling for your hearth fire. It was used for stuffing your mattresses for your bed. It was used for making beer, so you have a nice drink in the evening next to your fire and by your mattress, So everything about heather was this kind of comfort to help human beings through the winter time when they're going indoors to get out of the cold. And just like gorse, the heather too is low shrub for little creatures, protecting mice and birds and so on in the harsh winter time. So the heather is still protective like gorse is protective, but it's softer to the touch. Yeah, but both gorse and heather corresponding with the wild heath, the terrain of the winter hunter's wild hunt. So directly above heather is a big constellation known as Ophiuchus, and he is a serpent bearer. He's usually depicted holding a great big snake, and on one side of him is the tail of the snake, which is towards the end of the days of heather, and the serpent's head we've already seen. So he's corresponding with heather and the Samhain, and he's holding this great big serpent. And he was a healer. You know, like the serpent on a rod is a symbol of medicine, a symbol of healer. And his skills as a healer were so incredible that he was said to be able to bring the dead back to life. That's an interesting statement. Dagda's magic staff with one end could kill, and with the other end bring the dead back to life. And as we're going into heather, or heather is going into Sagittarius, Sagittarius corresponds with the father of the gods, and in Irish that is the Dagda. So we've already touched on that. If you go to heather or Aspen for 2024, there's a whole video about Dagda and how the Dagda corresponds with that time of year. Interesting too that the gorse and the heather gives protection to snakes and adders and serpents and slow worms. And you've got this great big serpent above Samhain. Also, right above Ophiuchus is Hercules constellation, which is a zodiacal god having 12 labors. And right above Hercules is the head of Draco, the Pendragon. The head of the dragon is right there at the center of the night sky. So that's a very potent, powerful image for the Samhain, this head of the dragon, the Pendragon. So the young heroes have come down from the pine forest, down into the wild heath, doing the wild hunt. And what is the wild hunt? Well, the wild hunt is a psychopompic thing described by many Christian writers as quite a scary, frightening, horrible nightmare of a thing, with hellhounds seeking the souls of the dead. You know, they turn it into a horror film. There's actually the protective warriors from the Star Realm hilltops coming down to take the dead to the next world as protective guardians, just like the Archangel Michael protecting souls to the next world. So really the wild hunt was there to guide people through the valley of death and all that kind of idea. It's a bringing the souls together and leading them, guiding them to the spirit realm. Heather takes us to the Aspen woods. So you've gone through the wild heath of gorse and heather, and at the far end of the heather, there are aspen trees. And aspen corresponds completely with Sagittarius. And what's unique with the aspen tree is that its folklore is all about death and burial. And through every twig of the aspen tree, there is a 5-pointed star, which is an accepted symbol of goddess protection. That's why there's rowan trees in fields, because there's 5-pointed stars on the rowan berries. And the aspen tree has the same blessing from the goddess of this 5-pointed star protection. But the aspen leaves shake and shiver and make the tree sound like it's whispering. So the voice of the spirits are talking as the wind blows through the aspen tree. But relating to Sagittarius, the actual center of our galaxy is to be found in the constellation of Sagittarius, what they call galactic center. So many ancient cultures saw the stars as the spirit realm, that we go there when we die and come back from there when we're born. But the stars were seen as spirits or spirit world. So again, this psychopomp wild hunt leading into the trees of death. Think of it more like Native American sacred ground. This is a cemetery. This is a blessed place where your loved ones have been placed after their lives, and their souls are going on to the star realm. So the aspen tree is holding that intrigue. And it's corresponding with a bright star called Lyra, constellation Lyra. The star is called Vega, is the bright star of Lyra. And it's a constellation of the harp, and corresponding with Sagittarius is also the Dagda, and the Dagda has his wonderful magical harp that keeps the seasons turning. So that's kind of there too, with Aspen and Sagittarius. So Aspen very much holding that stillness and peace and silence of death, takes you then to the yew tree, the conclusion of the Ogham journey. And the yew tree is holding the position of the winter solstice and the rebirth of the sun, or the rebirth of every soul, So that's the story of the fourth Aicme, the pine tree, the gorse, the heather, the aspen, the yew tree, with folklore and their stars, their corresponding stars. That's the story that is sung to the harp with the fourth Aicme. And the yew tree, the winter solstice, corresponds with two other bright stars, Altair of Aquila the eagle and Deneb of Cygnus the swan, create what's known as the summer triangle. It might seem counterintuitive that the triangle is here at winter solstice. That's because it's below the horizon. And when the three birds are below the horizon, or when the summer triangle is below the horizon, the winter hexagon is above. So the opposite times of the year. So at the winter solstice, up in the night sky is Orion facing off Taurus, the bull, and so on. And at summer solstice, Orion is below the horizon and the three birds are in the night sky. So it's kind of like a polarity mirror image thing. So right now, with a wild hunt, you're going down into the spirit realm, to the realm of the stars, and the summer stars, the three birds, are below the horizon in the underworld as well. So it's all this kind of descending down, down, down. But it also means that the star on top of a Christmas tree corresponds with the brightest star of Cygnus the swan and the yew tree. So that's a nice little bit of iconography for you at home when you've got your Yule tree or Christmas tree, you put a star on top. That could be Deneb of Cygnus the swan, corresponding with the winter solstice. So I'll stop sharing and you can put your microphones on, and we'll talk about those 5 trees and the whole story of the fourth quarter. Rosemary?
It's interesting because when I first started working with the redwoods in the local park, I have a redwood there. And when I first started connecting with it years ago, one of the things that it told me was that we're like telegraph poles and we are communicators. And it's almost as though all those trees throughout the planet are sending messages, because we always think about the mycelium in the roots, but actually where it's reaching up, it's actually doing more as well. And I connected it also when I went to the sequoia in California, you know, where the big trees are. They are just so powerful and just overwhelmingly powerful. And I found them to be so knowledgeable and so wise, so wise. So I found that very interesting. And Vicky was saying about being there in the Aberdeenshire area and the pines being on the top, and then how it all comes into the wild hunt, and they're there. The young men are there below them because they're so protective. I just think the whole thing comes together beautifully. Thank you.
It's interesting about the pine trees and all trees creating energy fields. There was a UFO writer in the late 70s, early 80s called Tony Wedd, and he made a rather obscure observation that most UFO sightings were happening above pine trees. And there was something preferable about the energy being given off or something, you know, there was a relationship.
Well, actually, that's really very interesting because on the day that I made the redwood, it's called the Red Doorway, there were several things that happened. And one of them was that Spirit used the sound of an aircraft, and I had extraterrestrial energy coming in. And the door opened, and it was all to do with Kuan Yin. It was just such an extraordinary mixture of feminine, masculine, and otherworldly stuff all marrying together in this one energy. So that I'm not surprised about, because that was what I picked up. It's something about the lift descends, others arrive, we meet the friends, you know, so it was quite interesting, the poem, and I remember it so well, even though it was years ago. It was a very misty day, and it was quite sort of Harry Potterish, you know, and all this was happening. And I had a friend with me who had never seen energy before, and I'd put the bowl down below the tree, and she saw the energy going into the tree, into the bowl, and she'd never seen energy like that before. So it was really beautiful. She's in spirit now. Her name was Jenny. So she's a bright star in the sky now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, I live in the redwoods. So just across the road from my house are four beautifully matched, perfect redwoods that have been there. They're young. They're probably only 150 years old, and they're very tall. And we don't go and lie on the ground there because it's too urban, but we go a little bit out of town to some other groves we have, and sometimes there's community gatherings, and people want to lie inside of these hollow redwoods and at the base of them. And if you take a regular camera, not an iPhone, you get huge numbers of orbs in that area. And especially if you're inside the redwood, there's just lots and lots of orbs with people who are feeling that loving feeling. And I was connecting the redwood tree to the yew because Mana and I have talked a number of times about making our own OM for the west coast of California. We don't have yew trees, but we have redwoods, and I'm hearing all your conversation about the pines being so tall and the tree connecting to the heavens, and we totally relate the redwoods to that. The mountains here are full of redwoods, as many as have not been cut, as well as pines and fir. So it's really this has been a great day for me to hear your correspondences. I appreciate it.
I've been thinking about the yew tree a lot lately and talking to, because I'm doing artwork relating to the runes at the moment. And of course, Norse mythology has Yggdrasil, the world tree. And some people who work with the runes see Yggdrasil as an ash tree. But I've been talking to quite a few people that work with the runes in a very devoted way, and they see it as a yew tree. And I was just really fascinated that for the Ogham, the yew is the conclusion tree. You know, it's there. It's the oldest living tree at the end of the Ogham cycle, and possibly it's the Norse world tree as well. If another name for the yew is the winter ash. So anyway, it's just we'll come to that when we get to the yew tree. But although the runes in the Ogham seem like different cultures, they're both Northern European, and there's some kindred things between them as well. So my brain's a bit pickled at the moment. Yeah.
Hey Yuri.
Hey Andy.
Hey, thanks for letting me in. Me and Manu have been out acorn picking the last few weeks, picking this acorn harvest, and pretty much it's just kind of finishing today. And I think that's quite interesting relating to this time of year that it's like, I guess it varies each year, you know, when the beginning and the end of the kind of picking time is. But you can imagine that in ancient Ireland and England, it would have been one of the main crops they would have been getting at this time of year. And then you've kind of finished getting the acorns in, you can move on to hunting or whatever else. So they would have been so tuned into that,
Yeah.
watching the trees all year, seeing what harvest was coming. What's there a lot of game? Like there's not a lot of squirrels this year, so you can actually get some hazelnuts because it was a tough year. The last winter was tough for them.
I know they would feed
So,
acorns to pigs and boar. Are you going to
yeah,
turn them into flour or something? What are you going to do with them?
they're going to tree nurseries.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, because
Yeah,
there is a way of treating them and getting the tannins out, and humans can
yeah,
eat them as well. Yeah.
yeah. We
Wow.
would like to do that. Yeah,
Cool.
amazing.
I'm a vegetarian, so I'm a bit uncomfortable about talking about hunting stags and hunting animals and stuff because I'm just too sentimental. But the logic for the stag and being the hunting time of the year, or this time of the year, is kind of what Andy was just saying, that the agriculture has stopped and the harvest time is now concluded. You know, everything's being brought in for storage. So there's nothing else left to do other than hunt. And the reason for that it is that the food or the rations have got to last not until midwinter, but until the following spring, until the following summer. Nothing can be eaten until like April, May with the earliest crops. So the food's got to last a long time. And the other time for this, the other logic for this being the hunting time is the deciduous trees are dropping all of their leaves so that it's easier to see creatures in the woods and hunt them because there's less camouflage there, you know. So the stags that are going to get hunted down are going to be the old and the infirm or lame, and so on, you know. But using the acorns would be a way of keeping the pigs and boar fat through the winter as well, you know. So a sentimental
Hunting.
vegetarian isn't comfortable with Iron Age lifestyle, you know. But
You could be hunting mushrooms.
I'll be hunting mushrooms. But the seasonal logic of tribal society is important understanding.
Well, just going back to what I was talking about before recording, just for the sake of the recording. So yeah, the beginning of the week, I was up walking up a big hill up in northeast Scotland, and walking up to a Pictish hill fort, and basically walking through the fourth Aicme. So there we were, going up through the gorse and the heather, and eventually the pine. And you know, if you had to put a visual representation of that set of the Aicme, it would be that. It was incredible, really, what we went through. But I was doing a bit of research and looking at the medieval kennings for pine. And it's on about the beginning of an answer or the beginning of a calling. So I don't know whether that's useful to know. It's like the beginning of the next step.
I think that might relate to the vowel, because the fourth Aicme is all the vowels. There's no vowels anywhere else in the Ogham. So these 5 trees are the 5 vowels. And the first one is the A. So the beginning of an answer is A. you know, and it's there, or a discovery is or the light bulb moment, yeah, you know, or Finn McCool burning his thumb on the salmon, you know, it's there.
Okay.
The first sound of a newborn baby is you know.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Okay, thank you.
But I am thinking that with next year's cycle, when I say go back to basics, might just go back to the word kennings and maybe back to the Book of Ballymote and just get really into the archive of the Ogham, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Yuri, did you just say that you were thinking of going through some myths next year? That would be really nice to go through some of the myths that are in the star lore of the Ogham.
Yeah, definitely. For me, the stars are really important, and I know a lot of people don't quite get it sometimes, or if you say star lore, they think you're talking about horoscopes in a newspaper or something, you know. But it's actual. If you think that you're living in a valley or you're living at a village and you're there all the time, year after year after year, that's your family home. The seasonal stars tell a landscape story that's repeated year after year after year. That every spring, such a constellation comes over such a hill. You know, you would get to know your star lore story, your seasonal stars very well. And the importance of that is it's kind of archaeology. So when you start understanding star lore symbols, like with the summer triangle can be 3 birds, or often it's 3 apples. And in various stories, you'll find 3 brothers, 3 birds, 3 apples, and you can start realizing then that actually this is a fairy tale telling some star lore motif, you know, and so then the star lore becomes a way of understanding deeper meaning in stories. And some of the old Welsh bardic stories seem so surreal that they're like, oh, it's just surreal nonsense, surely, you know. But when you know bits of star lore, you're like, no, it means something. That's quite profound. But you need to learn the star lore, you know. So, for instance, when Bran has his head decapitated and his followers are taking his head to London to be buried on the Tower of London site and everything, before they get there, they stop at a place called Harlech, and they're there for 7 years. Now, this all sounds really surreal and crazy, you know, but they're there for 7 years listening to the birds of Rhiannon. Well, what the hell is that about? Well, the birds of Rhiannon are the 3 birds. The 3 birds are the summer triangle. So it means that somehow for 7 years, instead of going summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, for 7 years, they stayed in the summertime, like an otherworld, like a Hesperides, like a Summerland, a mystical place where Bran's head did not die. It kept talking because they were in this mystical Summerland. So all of that is there. And then you get a poem where Taliesin says of himself, chief bard am I, and I come from the region of the summer stars. And Taliesin was there with Bran's head listening to the summer birds, you know. So these aren't surreal gobbledygook things, that they're messages that make sense when you know the star lore symbolism. That's my rant about that, you know. So for me, the stars are a way of understanding ancient mystery teachings from different mystery cults before Christianity, whether it's Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Celtic. You know, that the stars of the Northern Hemisphere were the storyboard. You know, that's the original cinema or iconography.
Yeah.
So
You
all
can
I've
quite
done
imagine the
yeah, go on.
storyteller I can quite imagine the storyteller around a campfire pointing up and saying, "Do you want to know how Gwyneth Neath got there, or
Yeah.
who's coming next over the horizon?"
And some of those storytellers might have been travelers, so they're coming to a camp and they're sitting down at the campfire and they know it's what time of year it is, and they're going to tell their story, and at the end of their story the right constellation is going to be in the sky, you know, that they've actually synchronized their storytelling to that time of year, you know. That would make the heavens come alive to people.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Some stories take days to tell, so they could time it like that.
Yeah. And also, with your thinking that your ancestors' spirits are in the stars, you want to hear about those star realm places and stories. Anyone else, or should we do our meditation to the pine tree? Okay, then I'll stop recording, put your microphones off, and we'll go and get some pine cones.